Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to another week of me sharing some ideas. I hope that you find these helpful and useful as we talk about Exodus, kind of the middle part of Exodus here from 19 up through about 32, 34, somewhere around there, and things like that. So let's jump right in. Chapter 19. I started off talking about how Moses took the people, the children of Israel, to Mount Sinai. He had had a great experience there with the Lord, and he wanted them to have that same experience, a temple-like experience, and making covenants with God. And so we covered these verses here, and in verse 5, it talks about how the Lord wants his people to become a peculiar treasure. And then we spent some time discussing how do we become a peculiar treasure, and what does it actually mean? Of course, there's a great talk from President Nelson back in 95, where he talks about the Hebrew term segula, which means valued property, and so we'd be a valued treasure. Then I talked about peculiar can also just mean unique, different than everything else. And so I showed them a picture of a peculiar treasure. This is a diamond ring. It's not a ring with a diamond stuck on top of it like we think of most diamond rings. This is a 150 carat diamond that has been cut into a ring. The last time this sold publicly, it sold for $68 million in 2012. In today's currency, that makes it worth about $98.5 million. And what makes this so valuable? What makes it so expensive and worth so much? Well, it's because it's unique, it's different, it's peculiar. And so we talked about that. I then shared some quotes here from Sister Becky Craven about becoming a peculiar people and what a compliment that is. And then she talked about that this is difference between the Lord's people and the world is going to be getting wider. The distance is going to be widening because of our covenant living. And so I make the point here with my students that what makes us peculiar is the making and keeping of covenants. But at the same time, I point out to him, as Elder Anderson did here, we do this without isolating ourselves from others who believe differently. So we don't shun other people. We don't do that. But as we keep our covenants, we become unique. We become peculiar. We become valuable to the Lord. And President Nelson again makes that point here, that when we make covenants with God, we will become closer than before because of our covenant. And so I really tried to emphasize and hit home the idea that our peculiarity comes because of the covenants that we make and keep with the Lord. Now, in doing that, that could be a whole day right there. And then the next day, or if you can do it all in one day, that's fine too. The next day, I talked about the Ten Commandments. I gave the students a little bit of time to see how well they knew the Ten Commandments. I just gave them a blank piece of paper, asked them to number 1 through 10, and write down the Ten Commandments. Out of my about 100 students, I had one student that got all 10 in order. In fact, she was the only one that got all 10. The next highest I had was 8, a few 7s, and then most people were 5 or 6 or less of knowing the Ten Commandments. And so then we put this graphic up. I just swiped it off of Google, and it gave us a chance to talk about the commandments and what they meant. I found a lot of them didn't know what a graven image was and what that meant. A lot of them didn't know what bearing false witness was, and a lot of them didn't know what coveting was. And so we had a good discussion about what these 10 commandments mean. I then showed this inspirational video from Elder L. Tom Perry, where he talked about the 10 commandments. And he points out that 4 of them, most of the world still somewhat tries to follow. But the other 6, people have just put to the side and things like that. So if you haven't seen that video, it's about 3 minutes long. You can find it on the church website. Well worth your time. It's a great video from Elder Perry. Then I had the students turn to Doctrine and Covenants 59 to show that the 10 Commandments are still around today. And here it also mentions loving God and loving your neighbor, which a lot of students thought those were some of the 10 Commandments. And so we had a little time to discuss how the Savior responded to the question of which is the great law, which is the greatest commandment. And that's where he gave that to summarize the 10 Commandments. But I had them turn to Doctrine and Covenants 59. And in verse 6, of course, after rattling off a few of the 10 Commandments, the Lord then says, nor anything like unto it. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, nor do anything like unto it. And then we talked about how that phrase, nor anything like unto it, changes the meaning of the Ten Commandments in our day. Talked about what would be like unto killing somebody, what would be like unto stealing, what would be like unto bearing false witness, and so on and so forth. And had a good discussion talking about that. So that wraps up through Exodus chapter 20. Then on another day, I did Exodus 24, 32 through 34. And I did a little activity with them that I called punishment now and then, just talking about the punishment for crimes or sins in our day compared to Moses' day. So we talked first about murder, and they said, well, life in prison or the death penalty, or if you had a really good lawyer, maybe you could get off. And then we looked at Exodus 21:12, where it says that he that killeth shall surely be put to death. And so we just went through some of these: disrespect to parents, if your animal kills somebody, idolatry, Sabbath breaking. And then we talked about the summary of the law of Moses of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And then I put up this little quote from Tevier from The Fiddler on the Roof, and then also took them to Matthew 5, where the Lord teaches the higher law, and that if a man strike thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also, and so on and so forth. And we talked about what all that meant. Then there was a quote from Elder Nelson, President Nelson, back in 2002, about if we still followed the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, then it's an unproductive path that would leave us blind and toothless. And so that was a good discussion we had there. Well, then I talked about how when Moses went up on the mount, the people got worried. He'd been gone a long time, and so they were a little scared, and so they built a golden calf. And I went through that whole thing of Moses coming down and smashing the tablets and things like that. But then I wanted to ask my students. I said, just before the Ten Commandments were given, back in Exodus chapter 19, the people professed that they loved the Lord, and we will do whatever he asks. They then get the Ten Commandments. Then Moses is gone for 40 days, and they go back to idolatry, and they're gone. And so I talked to my students. We had a good discussion about how do we make sure we can maintain our determination to follow the Lord. After we have a good youth conference, a good seminary class, a good sacrament meeting, and we walk out of there thinking, this is great, I am recommitted, I am going to do right, I'm never going to sin again, what have you. But how do we maintain that? And, they came up with things like, well, you need to have experiences frequently and consistently. Some people also brought up that you need to write it down. You need to share it in your journal. You need to share it with others so that you can be reminded of it later and things like that. So really had a good discussion. I love these chapters. I love the way the gospel is presented here in the book of Exodus, and the importance of covenants, the importance of commandments, and the importance of following the Savior in all that we do. So again, I hope that you found this helpful. I hope you're enjoying your teaching as we get into spring here and approaching the end of the school year. And I hope you make it a great week. I'll see you next week.